Hi guys, this is me Osama Gaza. Welcome to my channel, and in today's video we'll be talking about something I personally consider the most important thing in film and video editing. Again, I only represent my own opinion. I don't represent anything else. And honestly guys, I do believe that color grading is the most important thing in video editing. Alright, so before explaining how color grading works in Adobe Premiere Pro and the basic steps of how to color grade your videos in order to make it look more cinematic, more filmic, there is a very important concept everyone should understand. Everyone interested in film editing should understand. This concept is something called the dynamic range. What is the dynamic range? And the dynamic range represents everything an average and normal human eye can see. And that's pretty much the distance between the darkest and the brightest points in whatever you're looking at. And by the way, guys, I'm not talking about something you can see through the lens of your camera. I'm talking about things that you normally see on a daily basis. So, for example, if you're looking at a tree, you will find some spots that are extremely bright because these are the spots where the sunlight can reach, and some other spots are a little bit hidden and the sunlight can't reach, and that's why you can find more shadows or more dark areas. Then everything else in between these two extreme points, the extreme shadows or dark areas and extreme highlights or bright areas, everything else in between represents how dark or how bright what you're looking at is. Alright guys, so now let's play a little bit around with Adobe Premiere Pro and see how everything I said looks like in a real working process. So first of all, let me just jump to my Lumetri Scopes panel, and if you guys don't have this by default here, you can just go to Window and make sure that Lumetri Scopes panel is checked. So first of all guys, what we have here, we have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Exposure is pretty much, as you guys can see, how bright your footage is, and of course this extreme bright, no one wants that, but it's pretty much self-explanatory. So it depends on the footage, it depends on the environment you're shooting in. So for example, in this footage over here, the sun is extremely bright and really strong, so if we went all the way up like that, it's gonna be crazy, you can't see anything, so you gotta be careful a little bit with that. Then we have contrast. For me, contrast is a little bit tricky because it actually represents what we said in the beginning of this video. It works on a distance between the bright or the highlights and the dark or the shadows of any footage. But the difference is that it works and deals with that while having more colors around in the footage. So for example, if we try to reduce the contrast all the way down, as you guys can see, it gets a little bit faded, which means that the distance between the highlights and the shadows has reduced, and it is not that visually appealing. So whenever we increase the contrast a little more, the distance here increases and it gets more visually appealing for the human eyes. Then we have highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. To be honest with you guys, in the beginning I was thinking that highlights and whites are the same thing, shadows and blacks are the same thing, and apparently I was wrong. So alright, so let's start with the whites and blacks. Whites is the extreme bright areas, which means that it represents the extreme right point on this graph, or the upper part in this graph. So for example, if we try to increase this value all the way up, as you guys can see, this graph, these steps here, or whatever you want to call that, move all the way up in order to move to the brightest areas. And if we try to increase the black areas, as you guys can see, these steps respond to that by moving all the way down on our graph. And as you guys can see here, the black areas just got darker by moving the slider all the way to the left. Alright, so if whites represent the extreme white or bright area, and blacks represents the extreme dark or the darkest area, what are shadows and highlights? Highlights is pretty much representing the spots that are closer to the brightest area than the darkest area, and similarly shadows represents the spots that are closer to the darkest areas than the bright areas. Alright guys, so now let's jump into one of my footage and see how can we color grade that and give it this film cinematic look. And by the way guys, this piece of footage I have here, there is no color grading done on it, and it's a little bit tricky, and I made it on purpose, or chose it on purpose, because as you can see there is a very strong bright sunlight in the background, and you have this kind of faded colors in the foreground. And of course the trickiest part in color grading is the midtones. I'm pretty sure you guys heard of that a lot, midtones. Right, so midtones represents the skin tones of the people in your footage. Alright, so now let's get to work guys. Let's see how we can color grade that and make it more visually appealing. So as I said before, it's a little bit tricky because the background is super bright, and it kind of covers the main object in this footage, which is the hands, brush, and the ferns. So what we're trying to do is to reduce the brightness of the sun in the background and emphasize the skin tone of this lady. Alright, so first of all, we'll be working with the highlights and the shadows. Just try to balance it off a little bit. So I'm going to move the highlights like that, and the shadows to the left so that the hand gets more visible. Then do the same thing to the blacks and whites. Yes. Then I'm going to increase the contrast a little bit. Alright, let's check that before and after. Alright, so now I guess I can just give it a little bit of saturation, but not too much, just a little bit. So, no, not too much. Something like 1 or 2. Yeah, I guess that's enough. Alright, so as you guys can see, it started having this kind of cinematic look already, but we're not done working yet. But the reason it started having this is because we did drag the highlights and the shadows in the opposite direction, and that already does its job without going any further. Alright, so now we can go to, no, let's actually leave that to the end, not now. Let's now go to color wheels. Alright guys, so color wheels are pretty much the secret behind having this kind of film and cinematic look into any video. And the way it works is by fixing these shadows, midtones, and highlights values in order to come up with a cinematic look. And first of all, I'm going to start with the shadows. Alright, so shadows are not always, but more commonly better work with a blue color. So I'm going to drag this plus sign to the blue color. Like that, a little more. And as you guys can notice, it started getting more bluish already. So I'm going to fix that by dragging the midtones to the yellow area in order to expose the skin tone here. Like that. And it started getting more yellowish this time. So I'm going to fix that by dragging the highlights just a little bit into the blue area. Just like that. Alright guys, so these are the basic steps in order to have this kind of cinematic look everyone wants to have in their videos. Next, you can actually get more creative by playing a little bit around with these lumetri curves over here. So you can change the brightness of your video by moving this RGB curve, or if you want to control, increase or decrease like certain colors in your footage, you can go to the red channel and either increase it or decrease it if you want. Depends on what you want to see in your video. And of course do the same with the green and blue channels. Alright guys, so now go back to the creative panel over here and see what kind of options we have and how we can get more creative with it. Alright, so first of all, now as we already did color grade our footage and we have the desired look, we can actually tweak that up a little bit and fine tune it by giving it a little more of faded film look like that. And that's how you enhance the film and cinematic value in your color grading. And you can also control the sharpen, vibrance, and saturation, but I don't really like to play with the vibrance or the sharpen sliders over here, so I would just keep it like that. Alright guys, so now let's move to the last thing I wanted to talk about in this video, and this thing is the LUTs presets, or even if you want to call it templates made by Adobe Premiere Pro to help you color grade your footage if you're still a beginner, or even if you just don't have time to get through all this process. And to use these LUTs, let me first create an adjustment layer. and drag it on top of my footage here, and let me drag it to the left. And now if you go to creative panel, look, you have like all these bunch of LUTs made by Adobe Premiere Pro. These LUTs are pretty much made to help you get this kind of famous cinematic look with less effort than, as I said before, getting through all this process from scratch. So let me try a bunch of these on this video just to show you how it works. So again, just make sure you're actually highlighting your adjustment layer, go to creative, and now choose any one of them. And by the way, you can get through them by just pressing these arrows over here. Let's try another one. Okay, there's something wrong. It doesn't let me use it. I don't know why. Right, so let's just go to choose this one or this one. And by the way, guys, I found like really cool stuff in here. I don't know why some people don't like it or don't use it, but it's really fun just to play a little bit around with it and explore more possibilities in Adobe Premiere Pro. And by the way, if you're still a beginner, as I said before, it works perfectly to give you like starting point or a standard line for knowing how to color grade your video, like having something like having a cheat sheet. If you're in an exam and you want to have a cheat sheet, these slots are pretty cool for that purpose. Alright guys, so that was pretty much everything for today. I tried to cover the basics of the cinematic look, giving you an idea on how this process goes. Then you can discover and explore more in Adobe Premiere Pro and come up with your own unique style. Try to stay as straightforward as possible, just trying to make everything easy to comprehend. And so if you guys have any more comments or any special color grading technique you want me to analyze, you can share that with me in the comment section below and I will try my best to do it. Thank you guys so much for keeping up with me, and as I always say, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram to stay updated with my latest designs and videos. Thank you guys so much for watching and see you next time.